Last week, you heard the story behind why and how I started my small business. In today's episode, let's dive into how booth life started for me and the journey of how I ended up with so many booths.
Welcome to the Rescued and Upcycled podcast with weekly inspiration, tips on trying new techniques, and overall real talk about owning your own DIY business. Now, here's your host, Sonnet Ullenbrock.
Welcome back to Rescued and Upcycled. I'm your host, Sonnet Ullenbrock of Sonnet's Garden Blooms. And in last week's episode, we ended up discussing how my business closed after 3 years in downtown Appleton. Basically, we were told that the building was up for sale, and then the individual that bought it was the owner of a business right next door, and with his intent of expanding his business. We didn't know when, and we couldn't come to terms of another lease, so we looked elsewhere and we tried to find something. Unfortunately, we did not find something that was absolutely perfect for us. So on December 31st of that year, we decided to close our storefront. It felt like we were closing our businesses. For 3 years, we have invested so much time into that business and into our brick and mortar store. It just felt devastating. And honestly, as we shut the door that one last time on December 31st, I really felt like it was the end of my business. I was thinking, what do I have now? I have a bunch of merchandise at my home, which has totally filled my garage, totally filled up my basement and my spare bedroom. It's a mess. And I have a Facebook page and I have a website with a landing page. I didn't have much, I felt like, and I didn't know what to do or where to go. And as we shut the door that last night and turned off the lights that one last time, I was heartbroken. I literally broke down and cried. I didn't know what to do. I started racking my brain. I was brainstorming and trying to figure something out. I'm like, this cannot be the end. I don't care. And like I said last week, guys, when one door closes, another one always opens. I truly believe this. I feel like this was just God's way of saying, this is not the path you need to be on any longer. You need to do something different. And that is exactly what happened. I sat down one day as I was brainstorming, and all of a sudden it hit me. Oh my gosh, there was that phone call that I had received months prior. And it was from a gal who had, at that time, just opened a location where she was having vendors at her store. And she had reached out to me. She saw me at the farm market and was so impressed with my booth setup and the products that I had offered, like all my handcrafted items, my barn quilts. And she had offered me a space in her store. But at that time, I was on a totally different journey and path. And my initial thought was, what would I do with a booth? I am barely making time for an actual storefront. All my energy is put into this. And so I politely, declined. I said I appreciated the fact that she thought of me, but it was just not the time for me to do something like that. But thank goodness she planted that seed and I remembered. And so I then reached out to her and I said, we closed our storefront. And if there's a booth ever available, I would love to be a vendor in your store. And she said, what timing? I just had a vendor come to me and say he was closing his booth this month. And she said, he's moving out. You can come and take a look at the spot, see if it's what you envision, and we can get you in probably mid-month. I'm like, oh my gosh, thank the Lord. I was like, this is something that I'm getting excited about. And so I scheduled a time. I went there, I checked the booth out, and it was absolutely amazing, you guys. So you walked into her store and there was an aisle right down the center, and there was two main booths, one onto the left and one onto the right. And it was the booth on the right. And so it was like the first thing you saw when you walked in the door was that booth. I literally almost fainted. I was like, this is so perfect. And I said, I would absolutely love to be a vendor in your store. When can I start moving in? Do you think he'll get the stuff out? Just a few items were in the booth. And she said, well, I'll talk to him. And yes, how about, she told me a day. It was like in a couple days. I'm like, all right. I looked at the booth, I measured it, and then I went home and I sketched out a diagram of how I was thinking I would lay out some of the main furniture pieces. But then I sat back and I started brainstorming about what type of vibe did I want for my booth? Where did I want to go with it? I needed to think about the walls first. And I was not liking what they had there. So, one thing, if you guys have been following me for a bit, will know that I cannot say no to any items that are given to me ever. So, a while ago, received these boards and they looked like barn board. And there were stacks of them. And I had them in my garage. And I thought, this is going to be the perfect opportunity to use these. I was getting to be very well known for my barn quilts, and I thought it would be so cool to have my walls look like a barn. I broke those out and I laid them all out in the driveway. I had the measurements down. I'm like, "Oh, I don't think there's going to be enough though for the full wall." So then I remembered my cousin. He was doing at the time house remodels, and, it was like Christmas, almost like weekly with him because he would show up and he's like, "Hey, got some vintage windows. Oh, got some vintage doors." And he knew exactly what I was always looking for. So he would be dropping off all this amazing stuff out of these house renovations that really were all going to end up just in a dumpster, and he knew how much I loved them. One thing that he had recently dropped off was I don't know if he must have redid the roof of this old pole barn, and it had all this corrugated metal. He ended up dropping off like a ton of this corrugated metal, and I'm like, that's what I'm using for the bottom. So the top looked like a barn and the bottom had all the corrugated metal. And I started doing that. I built the walls first. My husband and I, we put the walls on a trailer. We built them actually at my house, and we put them on a trailer. We drove them there, we hauled them in, and we put them up. And what a transformation just those walls made. I mean, it gave the entire booth a completely different look and feel. And then from there, with my diagram of how I wanted to kind of lay out the furniture pieces, I started hauling all the furniture there. And step by step, I just started adding all those. And it took many loads to get just the furniture there because we're talking like a big hutch and a dresser and there was a buffet and a table. I staged all of that. And then that is when started adding like some medium pieces. So, and then once I got all the medium pieces added, I started adding some smalls and then some soft items such as like pillows and things like that. And it just all came together. Now, one thing I can recommend, and this is like a pro tip that I have early on in my journey discovered, is you should price every single thing in your booth because you want your booth to be ever changing. It's a little different than like your storefront where you'll have your staple pieces there, but a booth is so small that it's very easy to come up with a different furniture piece for that area unless it's designated for something like paint. But if it's just housing, like different, thrifted finds or anything like that, it should all be priced. So, one thing you want is your booth just to look different all the time, whether or not you move your pieces around if they're not selling. But I discovered that very early that you want to price everything. So, just a little tip. But once I got this booth up and running, you guys, it was like going so good. I realized very shortly that my life was not over at all by any means. It actually was a blessing in disguise that this all happened. I was able to get back so much time in my life. I was not feeling like I had to rush from work to the store and be there till this time and do this and do that. It was just relaxing. I had more time to go thrifting. I had more time to go rummaging. I had more time to spend with my family. Um, it just was amazing. Like I almost felt slightly bored because, well, I wouldn't say bored, but I had so much free time that I didn't know what to do with myself, I guess is what I should say. And so once I got this booth like up and running, and it was about, I would say like mid February. So it took about a month. And then I realized I still had a lot of stuff, you guys. I mean, a lot that I needed to put in this booth. And I wanted to get it out of the garage and I wanted to get it out of my basement. And so I was like, I think I need another booth. And then this is when the expansion just started. So I'm sitting there thinking, where would I want to go next though? And that is when I thought about the Yield Goat. And it's very close to my house. And so I thought, well, I'm going to go check it out. And I went over there and I checked it out. And I'm like, I think I could fit in really well here. So I spoke with the store manager and then I sent the owner, Megan, an email and I just sent her all the photos of my current booth and my store and like what I had to offer. And I heard back very shortly. We do have a booth for you. One just opened up, and I was so excited to now be part of the Yield Goat family. So, the first thing I did is I found out what my booth was, and I loved the location, you guys. It was absolutely perfect. Again, I just felt like another blessing in disguise. So I sat back and I was like, what do I want this booth to look like? Do I want to totally make it look different? And then that's really when I decided I wanted to have like a cohesive look to my booths. So each booth was going to have some of the staple things in it, like my barn quilts, but all the barn quilts are very unique. So you cannot find duplicate barn quilts at the locations. So every single barn quilt I paint is just, it's kind of like I just grab colors. So, or my signs, that was my signs. Some of them were duplicates, but everything else was going to be unique. Every piece of furniture, the thrifted finds, my upcycles, not one piece is going to be the same in either of my booths. So, I decided that I wanted the walls to be very similar. So if somebody would be at the first location and then came to the Yield Goat, they would say, "Oh, I think this might be Sonnet's booth." And I wanted that look and feel. So I went out and I measured the booth and I had some more of that wood left over and I had more of the corrugated metal. And you guys, it was close. It was cutting it really close, but I was able to make it work, and I ended up getting another set of walls from my, well, base I wanna say thrifted finds, but my free finds that I ended up getting, and once I got that up, it looked so good, and then from there, again, I just started adding all the main furniture pieces. I had pulled all the pieces that I had, from, like, my storage area, my home, and, I discovered that I needed a few more. So I went thrifting. I found this beautiful shelf and I did not want to sell the shelf. So this is where my pro tip from the very first booth came from. This is when I realized like, no, Sonnet, you need to price everything. So I got this shelf all painted and it was going to house a certain product of mine. And what happened was I priced it extremely high. I thought, I'm going to put a price on it. There is no way, I mean, absolutely no way that someone is actually gonna pay this for this beautiful shelf. I mean, it was beautiful. I loved it. It lasted in my booth a week and a half and it sold. I literally almost fell out of my chair when I opened up my, daily sales and it was on there. I was like, "Who in their right mind would pay that much for my shelf?" But they did, and so what I realized is that I need to price everything, but I also need to have backup stuff, ready to go. So I need to have a vignette, like, ready to move into either of the spaces. And that's what I started doing. I started curating different like vignettes and had them ready to go. And I was having a ton of fun doing this, you guys. So I was still working my full time job. And then in the evenings and on the weekends, I would be working on all my upcycling and I would go thrifting and I would like pull together different pieces. I'm like, oh, this would look good with this. And the everything was selling great. These 2 booths were really, really profitable. And so when I got word that another vendor location was opening and it was very close to my home, and this was Antique Up in Kimberly, I jumped on it. I was like, I am not passing this up. I am going to go there and I am going to get a booth in that location. So the first thing I did though was I reached out to my mom because I was missing doing the store with her. I was missing like our like collaboration that we did together. Uh it was just we had so much fun and my mom and I are so close, you guys. I just really missed it. So we went there together and we wanted a very large space because how we did the store is we each had our own space and then what we would do is we would set up our big pieces and then we would intermix all of our other pieces. And that is exactly how we ran that booth. And we made the booth look similar to my 2 booths, but a little different. So I still made it have like that barnyard red or the barnyard red color. And I did some whitewashed faux brick, and we did like a really beautiful charcoal gray wall. It looks similar, but it was a very different feel. And that's kind of what we wanted just because it was ours together. So we divided it in half. We did that. And then a short time of us having it, my dad came and helped us build this really beautiful arbor in the center. And that really like set that whole booth, like it just set it apart from everyone else's. It's just amazing. And I still have it up in the booth. I love it so much. And my mom and I were having so much fun together. We would curate all the different vignettes and we would figure out, what are you bringing in? I'm bringing this in. And it was just great. So now I had 3 booths and I was having a ton of fun managing all 3. And then we got word, my mom and I got word that a 4th location was opening. And I was super excited about this because I'm like, hey, if I'm managing 3 locations and I'm doing a pretty stellar job, and why not have a 4th location? Because how I was looking at this, and many of you may be going, oh my gosh, why do you need 4 locations? Why do you even need 3 locations? These locations were all in different like areas. So the clientele was completely different. It was very rare that people would go to like the Yield Goat and to Antique Up. So it was just interesting how they all had different clientele. Sometimes they were the same, but typically it wasn't. So when the 4th location, when they opened, I went and I talked to the individual who owned it, and I totally fell in love with the owners. Were so nice. The booth was a bit smaller, but that was okay. And my mom actually got her own booth, and then I got my own booth. So we decided we were going to each do a booth there And they did their grand opening, and I set the stage of my booth very similar to that of the first one and the Yield Goat. And then that's where this is like my mini failure here. And I still to this day cannot wrap my head around why this booth did not do as good as my other 3 booths. So, and my mom at this location, same thing. We both I don't know if it was where the location of this business was or what, but my word of advice to anyone who is starting a booth journey. Sometimes it's not you or your product. It may be the location, it may be it could be something other than what you're selling. So if you're not doing good, do not think it's you necessarily. It may be something else, like the location or, maybe how the location is marketing themselves. Um, so needless to say, this was the only location where I actually had to pay in for my booth rent. Normally at all the other locations, like I would always say within that first week of booth or the first week of the month, my booth rent should be paid. Everything else is profit. And it always worked that way. Not at this location. I literally was trying everything. I sat back and I was like, what can I change about this location to make it profitable? I had no idea. I tried everything. I tried to rearrange. I even put my best picks at this location. Like I would come up with my vignette and I would really want this vignette at the Yield Goat and it would end up here and everything would sit. It was like crickets. And I was so excited when I would get one sale because I'm like, okay, what's selling? And then I was trying to analyze that. Like, do I need to bring more of that in? And finally, I was at a loss. Like, I went to my mom and dad, and I'm like, what are you guys going to do? And my mom and dad decided they were pulling. So they pulled. And I'm like, "Nope, I'm gonna stay. I'm gonna try to make this work." What makes me think I can't do it here? I feel like if I do more advertising. So I was on Facebook giving this location more exposure than my others. I was doing as much as I could. And in the end, I finally realized I was really at a crossroad where I needed to make a decision and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And every time I would talk to the owner, I always felt so bad about leaving because I liked him so much. I did. I liked him and I liked his family. And they were very, very good people. And my mom kept saying, no matter how good they are, if it's not helping your business, you should not be there. And I knew in the back of my mind that that was true, but I held out, you guys. And again, I did like a remodel, and I just kept holding on. And my other booths, thank goodness, were so profitable that I didn't have to worry about it for a bit. So I finally was at the point where I'm like, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to do the math. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to make a decision in the new year. And that year into the new year, I was dragging my feet making that decision. And you guys, if you all remember, COVID hit. And if you remember what happened, the world literally shut down for months. And this was almost like a blessing in disguise for multiple reasons. Um, First of all, it had me just slow down my life to the point where I was able to reevaluate everything, and that included me being on the road with my booths. It also slowed it down so much that I was able to reevaluate my booths in general and then realize out of my 4 booths, well, which ones were profitable and which ones were not, and which I finally approached the location that was not profitable. And I gave my notice and I pulled my booth during that time. And I felt absolutely horrible because it turned out it was a long time we were all not open. But again, it was the best decision of my life. Out of the last 3 booths, or the 3 booths that I still had, that was also when I found out who were good business owners and who were not. And during that time, the Yield Goat stepped up and they did an amazing job for their vendors. Antique Up did as well. And the first booth, which I have not named, they did not. Um, they pulled some shyster stuff, and I won't go into all those details, but I actually reached out to an attorney to see what my rights were and what the other vendors' rights were in this situation. And she was trying to pull a fast one on all of the vendors that were there, which I I was so nervous the day that I gave my notice there, and my dad came with me to break down my booth and to take it all apart and to leave. And let me tell you, I thank God had my dad because I was so afraid she would be confrontational with me. It was just like a little bit of a scary situation there. So, in the end, it was the best thing that happened. I realized looking back, that situation probably was not the best situation for me. Even though I was very profitable there was just a lot of stuff that looking back, I'm just glad that that happened. So after, that was said and done, I ended up only having 2 booths then, once everything opened up. And then during that time, the owner of the Yield Goat wanted to expand over where my booth was currently. And that was another little blessing because she was offering me a much larger and substantial booth. And then that's where I moved now. So it was, we were completely shut down. It was the perfect timing. And I had another arbor that was in our storefront. And I'm like, oh, I can reuse that. So I pulled all that material out. I redid this other larger booth. And then I put up this elaborate arbor in there. And my booth it was completely transformed. So even though we were shut down, I was able to expand. And the Yield Goat did like live sales where they would go around and do lives and sell for us. And then like people could pick it up at the door. It was so nice, like what they did. Um, the other thing that happened was shortly after we all opened back up, I received a call from the manager at Water Street Vintage and asking me if I would be interested in having a booth there. And I'm like, wow, I just shut down 2 booths. Now I'm thinking about doing a third. I'm like thinking to myself, what are you thinking, Sonnet? But Water Street Vintage is in New London. And I'm like, okay, I'll do it. So I expanded to New London. And if you have ever seen me and my YouTube channel, that is the very first video that I ever did. My booth install of Water Street Vintage. And that was such it just was the best thing that ever happened. I am so excited to be part of Water Street Vintage, and still be part of the Yield Goat and Antique Up. It's like you have to find your perfect people to surround yourself with, people that are good and have good hearts, that are looking out for their vendors. And it just, it's, that's what I would recommend. Just even like in the DIY world, you want to surround yourself with good business owners, good people. And, and that's why I sell the products that I do because they are good people. Um, and the last takeaway from when COVID, shut us down, and I talked about slowing my life down. I was on the road every single weekend, and you may or may not know this, but I did the farm market every Saturday, and I had mentioned that in my first video. And then after I packed up the farm market, I would head up to St. Germain and I would do the St. Germain farm and flea markets every Monday. So every Saturday and Monday I was doing this. My truck was like my like store every and during the week I would restock my little truck, but this was only during the summer. So it started Memorial Day weekend and it ran through well, like the farm market ran until the end of October and St. Germain ran till Labor Day. But every single weekend I was doing this, and I only took off, I would think, maybe like 4th of July, possibly, I think was one of the weekends I took off. But other than that, I was there dedicated to doing this. And when this all happened and I slowed down when both of the markets were shut down that summer, I'm like, oh my gosh, look at what I'm missing out on. I mean, look at all this extra time that I get at our cabin, all this extra time that I get to spend with my husband and my kids. I was and if you think about it, it was a lot of time. Okay, and I really I felt like I was missing out. And so when everything opened back up, and the next year when those two markets sent me the information to sign back up, I didn't do it. I was like, "No, this is like weekends are my time to be with my family, to be with my friends, to enjoy time on the water." And it was just very eye-opening. So, people can complain about what happened during that period of time, but so many of us were able to slow our lives down and just truly enjoy those moments. And and it made me reevaluate so many things with my business. So after things got going again, and then we were, because we all worked from home for my full-time job. I was mentoring this young fella, and you may all wonder, like, how did you start your YouTube channel? Well, let me tell you, in next week's episode, I am going to let you guys in on how I went from basically just owning my booths to then opening up my YouTube channel, or starting my YouTube channel, I should say, and then really diving into a full website with an online store. And we can all thank my good friend Brendan, who I mentored during, prior to me doing all of this. So that is what we are going to, like tackle in next week's episode. But I just want to say that, like by wrapping it up this week, I just slow your life down a little bit and like really evaluate what's important. And then, like with your booths, don't always think it's just like you or whatever you're offering. It could be something totally different. But I hope you've enjoyed this week and, what I went through to get 4 booths and then go back down to 2 and then back up to 3. But we're going to tackle, like I said, next week, we are going to definitely tackle YouTube and how that really all got started, and talk a little bit about my friend Brendan, who we are still great friends. And thanks to him, I would not be here in my business now without all that advice. It was actually his dream to be a YouTuber, and he gave me all kinds of tips and tricks, and now I am here today. So, first and foremost, I just want to say thank you again for joining me. And please, if you are on any of the podcast platforms and you're enjoying this, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you don't miss out on an episode. And you guys can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Sonnet's Garden Blooms. And I will provide, moving forward, sneak peeks of upcoming episodes. And I provide a ton more content over there. And again, if you're watching me on YouTube, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let me know, you guys, in the comments what you're thinking about the podcast. If there are any topics that you'd love for me to cover, let me know. All right, guys, we will see you next week, and we're going to talk all things YouTube. Bye.